"Ma'am, I need to see your boarding pass again," the flight attendant said, her eyes narrowing as she examined the ticket. "Your boarding pass has to be confirmed first before you're allowed to board. Step aside for others to board." This is how it begins. A seemingly routine interaction at an airport gate that would ultimately bring an entire airline corporation to its knees. A story of prejudice faced in plain sight, of power hidden beneath the surface, and of justice that arrived with the force of a hurricane. Today I'll take you through the remarkable true story of how Maya Johnson, a black female CEO who was denied her rightful seat, revealed her true identity and transformed an entire industry overnight. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you based solely on your appearance? Where assumptions about who you are and what you're capable of clouded another person's judgment? If you've ever experienced discrimination or witnessed it happening to someone else, hit that subscribe button right now. This story is one you need to hear in its entirety, and I promise you, the ending will leave you speechless. Type respect in the comments if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment, regardless of their appearance, and share where you're watching from. This story of justice is just getting started. Maya Johnson was accustomed to being underestimated. As one of the few black female CEOs in America's tech industry, she had faced countless moments where her capabilities, her intelligence, and even her basic humanity were questioned. But on that fateful morning at LaGuardia Airport's Terminal B, she couldn't have known that the discrimination she was about to face would set in motion events that would change the landscape of American aviation forever. Let me paint a picture of who Maya Johnson truly was. A woman whose journey to the pinnacle of corporate America defied every statistical probability. Unlike many tech executives with pedigreed backgrounds and elite connections, Maya came from absolute poverty. Her mother worked 3 jobs in South Chicago to keep a roof over their heads in a neighborhood where success stories were as rare as winter heat waves. By age 16, Maya was already showing remarkable talent with computers. While her peers socialized and navigated high school politics, she repaired broken electronics from pawn shops and taught herself coding on a second-hand computer her science teacher had salvaged for her. This wasn't just a hobby, this was survival. At 17, she was making enough money fixing computers for local businesses to help her mother with rent. But the road was never easy. Despite perfect SAT scores, Maya was waitlisted at every top tech school she applied to. When she finally did secure a place at Northwestern on a partial scholarship, she worked 2 jobs while carrying a full course load. After college, the pattern continued. At her first tech job, she watched as her white male colleagues with less experience received promotions above her. When she created an innovative algorithm that saved the company millions, her manager took credit. When she spoke up about it, she was labeled difficult and not a team player. But Maya didn't break, she built. Instead of fighting a system designed against her success, she created her own. At 28, she mortgaged everything she owned to start Pinnacle Technologies. Her first office was her studio apartment. Her first employees were 3 fellow graduates who believed in her vision enough to work for equity when she couldn't afford salaries. Now, 15 years later, Pinnacle Technologies employed over 5,000 people globally and reported annual profits of $1.2 billion. Maya Johnson wasn't just successful, she was a force that had transformed an entire industry. But how many people would recognize her face? How many would see beyond her skin color to the power she wielded? This question would be answered dramatically on that spring morning at LaGuardia Airport. What's your guess? Do you think the airline staff would have treated Maya differently if they'd known who she really was? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The morning of our story, Maya was preparing for what might be the most important deal of her career. In her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, she packed lightly for her trip to Singapore. The Global Tech Innovation Summit wasn't just another conference. It was where Maya would deliver the keynote address that would secure a $500 million investment from the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund. This investment wouldn't just expand Pinnacle Technologies, it would fund their most ambitious project yet. But unlike many executives who travel with an entourage, Maya preferred traveling alone on long international flights. It gave her time to think, to prepare, to strategize. For the 20-hour journey ahead, she dressed simply but professionally. Black trousers, a silk blouse, and a tailored blazer she could remove during the flight. Her only luxury was a pair of handcrafted leather loafers. What Maya didn't know as she headed to the airport that morning was that her path would cross with Alexander Hamilton, CEO of Summit Airlines, a man whose leadership was driving his company straight into the ground. Summit Airlines was once the pride of American aviation. Founded in the golden age of air travel, it had built its reputation on luxury service and exclusive experiences. Their slogan, "The Sky's Elite," had once represented aspiration. Now, under Alexander Hamilton's leadership, it had become something else entirely. A dying giant clinging to outdated notions of who belonged in their premium cabins. At 68, Alexander Hamilton was a third-generation airline executive. His grandfather had founded Summit Airlines, his father had expanded it, and Alexander had inherited the CEO position almost as a birthright. With silver hair always perfectly coiffed and bespoke suits from London tailors, Alexander looked the part of the distinguished executive. But appearances can be deceiving. That morning, Maya's town car pulled up to the departures terminal. She tipped the driver generously and, rolling her carry-on behind her, entered the terminal unaware that this routine business trip was about to become anything but routine. Her day of frustration began the moment she stepped through the revolving doors of LaGuardia's Terminal B. Having flown first class hundreds of times before, she approached the premium check-in area, a separate section with plush carpet, minimal lines, and staff trained to cater to Summit's highest-paying customers. But before she could even reach the counter, a gate agent intercepted her. "Economy check-in is that way, ma'am," the agent said with a dismissive gesture toward the long, snaking line where dozens of passengers waited. Maya paused, took a controlled breath, and politely responded, "I'm flying first class to Singapore." She held up her digital boarding pass as evidence. The agent barely glanced at it. "Economy check-in is that way," she repeated, this time with visible impatience. It was the first little cut of the day, a small moment that most white travelers would never experience. But for Maya, it was all too familiar. She didn't argue. Instead, she walked to the premium counter anyway and was greeted by a different agent who processed her check-in without issue, though not without first double-checking her booking with visible surprise. Think about that moment for a second. Have you ever had your presence questioned in a space where you belonged? Where do you think these assumptions come from? Share your experiences in the comments. After checking her larger suitcase, Maya headed to security with just her designer carry-on and briefcase. The premium security lane was nearly empty, a perk of first-class travel that usually made the exorbitant ticket prices worth every penny. But as Maya approached the TSA checkpoint, an agent waved her out of the premium lane. "Random security check, ma'am. You'll need to go through enhanced screening." Maya watched as three white businessmen in expensive suits walked through the premium lane without a second glance from the same TSA agent. She looked around at the randomly selected travelers in the enhanced screening line. Every single one was a person of color. When her turn came, the male TSA agent's pat-down went well beyond standard procedure. His hands lingered too long. He checked the same areas multiple times. His touch was firmer than necessary. This humiliation burned inside her, but Maya maintained her composure. She'd learned long ago that showing anger would only make things worse. She'd be labeled as the angry black woman, giving them justification for their treatment. As she collected her belongings after the screening, she immediately noticed something was missing: her watch. Not just any watch, but a custom-designed Patek Philippe worth over $60,000. It had been a gift to herself when Pinnacle Technologies went public. More than its monetary value, it symbolized everything she had overcome. "Excuse me," she said to the TSA agent. "My watch is missing." The agent barely looked up. If it was there, it would have come through. "It was there. I placed it in the bin myself." What followed was 15 minutes of Maya insisting on reviewing security footage, while agents suggested she must have forgotten her watch at home. Finally, after she refused to move and threatened to call her attorney, a supervisor miraculously found the watch in a separate bin, one that Maya had never used. By the time she reached Gate 42C, boarding for her flight to Singapore had already begun. Despite the delays at security, she still had plenty of time. First-class passengers are typically boarded first, or given the option to board at their convenience. As she approached the first-class boarding lane, a gate agent named Rebecca, her name tag clearly visible, looked at Maya with immediate suspicion. "Excuse me, ma'am, this lane is for our first-class passengers only." Maya held up her boarding pass once again. "Yes, I'm aware, I'm in seat 2A. Rebecca took the boarding pass and scrutinized it as though it were written in a foreign language. She frowned, then looked up at Maya with obvious disbelief. "One moment, please." She picked up a phone and spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing up at Maya with narrowed eyes. By now, several passengers had begun to notice the interaction. A supervisor approached, a man in his late 50s with a permanent scowl etched into his face. His name tag read, "Thomas Wilson, Customer Service Supervisor." "Is there a problem here?" he asked, directing his question to Rebecca rather than to Maya. "She says she has a first-class ticket," Rebecca replied, emphasizing the word "says" as though Maya's claim was dubious at best. Thomas took the boarding pass and eyed Maya from head to toe, taking in her comfortable but clearly expensive travel attire. "Ma'am, are you aware that first-class tickets on international flights are very expensive?" The question hung in the air, its implication clear to everyone within earshot. A few nearby passengers snickered. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Maya's expression didn't change. "I am aware of the cost of my ticket. We'll need to verify your ticket. There seems to be some kind of irregularity." He stressed the last word as though he'd caught her in the act of fraud. "What irregularity?" Maya asked. "I'll need to see additional documentation. Passport, credit card used for purchase, and company authorization for the expenditure." This was not standard procedure. This was not required of other passengers. This was harassment disguised as security protocol. By now, several passengers had their phones out, recording the interaction. One older white woman muttered audibly, "Just show your papers if you have nothing to hide." Maya provided her passport and corporate credit card, though she rightfully refused to show any company authorization, a document that isn't required by any airline for any passenger, regardless of ticket class. "You'll need to step aside while we verify this information," Thomas insisted. "The flight needs to continue boarding." And so, as other first-class passengers boarded with nothing more than a cursory glance at their boarding passes, Maya was escorted to a customer service desk away from the gate. She was told the verification would just take a few minutes. Those few minutes stretched into 20, then 40, then over an hour. Maya sat at the desk, watching the minutes tick by on her reclaimed watch. No updates were provided. No explanations were offered. She repeatedly asked about the status of her verification, only to be told, "We're working on it." From where she sat, she could see her gate. She could see the final boarding calls being made. She could see the door to the jet bridge slowly closing. But what she could also see and hear was a group of Summit employees huddled at a nearby counter, occasionally glancing her way and laughing. Though they tried to keep their voices down in the busy but acoustically unforgiving airport terminal, fragments of their conversation reached her. "Thinks she belongs in first class. Probably her first time on a plane. Bet she won't be so bold when she misses her flight." Each word was a dagger. But what cut deeper was watching her flight, a flight she had every right to be on, in a seat she had paid thousands for, depart without her. The boarding door closed, the jet bridge pulled back. Through the large windows, she watched her plane taxi away. Only then did Thomas return to the desk. "I regret to inform you that while we were verifying your information, your flight has departed," he said without a hint of actual regret. "Unfortunately, you missed your boarding time." Maya's voice remained steady despite the rage and hurt building inside her. "I missed my boarding time because your staff deliberately detained me on false pretenses." Thomas ignored her accusation completely. "We can rebook you on the next flight to Singapore, which departs in approximately 5 hours. However, I'm afraid first class is fully booked. We can offer you an economy seat." This was the final insult, not just denying her the seat she had paid for, but downgrading her while pocketing the substantial difference in fare. Show me the booking system, Maya demanded. I want to see the first-class manifest for that flight. Ma'am, I'm not authorized to. Show me the system, Maya repeated, standing now, or I'll have my company's legal team check every record for that flight. Her calm confidence must have rattled him because, to her slight surprise, Thomas turned the monitor toward her. Whether he thought she wouldn't understand what she was looking at, or whether he simply panicked, we'll never know. But what Maya saw confirmed her suspicions. There were 3 open seats in first class on the next flight. You're lying to me, she said simply. There are 3 available first-class seats. Thomas quickly turned the monitor away. Those are blocked for operational reasons. What operational reasons? I'm not at liberty to discuss. Discriminatory reasons, Maya said, her voice rising just enough to be heard by nearby passengers. You prevented me from boarding my original flight, and now you're lying about availability to keep me out of first class on the next one. Several other travelers had stopped to watch the confrontation unfold. Some had their phones out, sensing that something significant was happening. I demand to be rebooked in first class on the next flight as compensation for missing my original flight due to your staff's actions, Maya stated firmly. Thomas's face flushed red. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. I will not be silenced when I'm being discriminated against, Maya replied, her voice perfectly controlled, but carrying enough to be heard clearly by those around her. That's when Thomas made the call that would ultimately destroy his company. He signaled to security. 2 guards approached rapidly, and the taller one immediately grabbed Maya's arm with unnecessary force. Ma'am, you need to come with us now, he said gruffly. Take your hands off me, Maya said. I have done nothing wrong. The guard tightened his grip, yanking her away from the counter. The sudden movement caused Maya to lose her balance, and her phone and documents scattered across the floor. As she bent to retrieve them, she noticed a familiar figure watching the scene from a short distance away. Even without the media photos she'd seen, she would have recognized Alexander Hamilton by his air of entitlement alone. The Summit Airline CEO was observing the situation with what could only be described as satisfaction. As the security guards continued to usher her away, she heard Alexander turn to a colleague and mutter words that would soon come back to haunt him. Some people just don't know their place. It was at that precise moment, as she was being forcibly escorted through the terminal while other passengers stared and whispered, that Maya's phone rang. What would you do if you were in Maya's position? Would you have agreed to board the next flight in economy, or would you stand your ground to remain in first class? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button now to follow this story of justice to its conclusion. Maya Johnson carefully gathered her scattered documents from the floor, her movements deliberate and unhurried despite the security guards looming over her. Her phone continued to ring, the custom ringtone indicating it was Julian Chen, her chief strategy officer. This wasn't a call she could ignore, even in the midst of chaos. I need to take this, she said to the guards, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Maya stepped slightly aside, maintaining eye contact with the security personnel to ensure they didn't attempt to physically remove her again. Julian, she answered, her voice immediately shifting to her business tone. What's the status? What the security guards didn't know, what Alexander Hamilton himself didn't know, as he watched from a distance with smug satisfaction, was that this call would be the beginning of the end for Summit Airlines. Maya, the Singapore Sovereign Fund needs our decision by tomorrow morning, Julian explained urgently. They need to know which airline we're recommending for the global corporate contract before they finalize the acquisition paperwork. And here was the first revelation that would change everything. Her company wasn't just a client of various airlines. They were conducting the final evaluation for a global corporate contract worth $3.7 billion over 5 years. Whichever airline secured this contract would provide exclusive travel services for over 40 multinational corporations within the Pinnacle Technologies partner network. Summit Airlines had been on the short list, along with 2 other major carriers. Maya's flight today was supposed to be the final evaluation of Summit's international first-class service, a test they had just catastrophically failed without ever knowing they were being tested. "I've seen enough," Maya replied, looking directly at Alexander Hamilton as though he could hear her. "Remove Summit from consideration immediately. Draft the recommendation for Singapore Airlines instead." But Julian had more urgent news. "There's another issue, Maya. The market is getting nervous about our position in Summit Airlines. There are rumors that we might be divesting." And here was the second bombshell. Behind the scenes, through her private investment firm, Maya Johnson personally controlled 28% of Summit Airlines stock. Combined, they represented the single largest ownership block in the struggling airline, larger even than the shares held by the Hamilton family. Most passengers watching the scene unfold had no idea that the woman being mistreated held enough stock to destroy the company's valuation with a single sell order. "The Singapore conference isn't just about our recommendation, Maya," Julian continued. "Everyone is expecting your keynote to signal the green light for our acquisition talks." And there was the third revelation. The Singapore conference wasn't merely about securing a $500 million investment. It was about finalizing Pinnacle Technologies' acquisition of Celestial Airways, Summit's largest competitor in the Asian market, a move that would fundamentally reshape the airline industry for decades to come. The security guards shifted uncomfortably, sensing that this seemingly routine situation was evolving into something far beyond their pay grade. One of them spoke into his radio, updating someone about the situation at Terminal B. Maya's mind worked with the calculating precision that had made her a legend in the tech industry. In less than 10 seconds, she had formulated a plan that would deliver both justice and a powerful business lesson. "Julian, I need you to do something right now. Contact our legal team and activate our voting shares. Call for an emergency board meeting of Summit Airlines today, not tomorrow. Cite shareholder concern over discriminatory practices and potential civil rights violations." She paused, watching Alexander Hamilton, who was now engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly heated conversation with Thomas Wilson, the supervisor who had denied her boarding. "And Julian, execute Plan Omega." Plan Omega wasn't just a dramatic phrase she had invented on the spot for effect. It was a strategy developed years ago for situations exactly like this, when discrimination threatened not just her dignity but the integrity of her business operations. As Maya ended the call with Julian, she immediately placed another to her CFO, then her legal counsel, then the head of her PR team. Each conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Each set in motion a different aspect of her response. The security guards still hovered nearby, but now they seemed uncertain. One kept glancing at his radio, waiting for instructions. The other was openly staring at Maya with growing recognition, as though trying to place her face. Across the terminal, Alexander Hamilton was now gesturing angrily in Maya's direction while speaking to an airport police officer. From his body language and occasional glances her way, it was clear he was trying to have her removed from the airport entirely. "She's being disruptive and threatening our staff," Alexander's voice carried across the space as his volume increased with frustration. "I want her escorted out of this terminal immediately." Unfortunately, a small group of passengers, the same ones who had been recording the confrontation earlier, began to vocally support Alexander's demand. "Get her out of here," a middle-aged man in a golf shirt called out. "Some people don't know how to behave in public," a woman added. And then, the ugliest comment of all, shouted by a red-faced man who seemed emboldened by the growing hostility, "Go fly with your own kind." The naked racism hung in the air, shocking even some of those who had been quietly judgmental before. A few passengers looked down, uncomfortable with the explicit hatred now on display. Others moved away, not wanting to be associated with such blatant bigotry. But something unexpected happened when the airport police officer approached Maya. Instead of immediately moving to escort her out, he hesitated. His eyes widened slightly with recognition. "Miss Johnson?" he asked quietly. "Maya Johnson from Pinnacle Technologies?" The officer, whose name tag read Officer Kevin Moore, had recognized her from a recent cover feature in Business Weekly magazine highlighting the most influential black executives in America. "You were just on the cover of Business Weekly," he continued, keeping his voice low. My daughter did her school report on you last month. She wants to be a software engineer because of you. This small moment of recognition, of being seen as who she truly was, rather than what biased assumptions made her out to be, changed the trajectory of what was unfolding. Officer Moore positioned himself subtly between Maya and the increasingly hostile group of passengers. It wasn't obvious, but he had made a choice about whose safety he was prioritizing. And then it began. Throughout the terminal, the electronic departure boards flickered. The screens showing CNN Airport Network in the waiting areas momentarily went black, then returned with breaking financial news. The chyron at the bottom of the screen told the story. Breaking: Summit Airlines shares plummeting amid rumors of major shareholder sell-off. Travelers throughout the terminal began to notice, pointing at the screens and murmuring to each other. Some pulled out phones to check their investment apps. The atmosphere in Terminal B subtly shifted as the financial drama began to overshadow the personal one. On the screens, financial analysts were already speculating about the cause of the sudden stock movement. One mentioned unconfirmed reports of discriminatory incidents and potential civil rights violations that could expose the airline to significant legal liability. Julian Chen had wasted no time in executing Plan Omega. Alexander Hamilton's phone rang, then rang again and again. His face, already flushed with anger, now drained of color as he glanced at the screen of his phone. He stepped away to take the call, his entire demeanor transforming from aggressive to defensive in an instant. The Summit Airlines CEO paced back and forth, occasionally glancing toward Maya with growing recognition and alarm. Whatever he was hearing on the other end of that call was clearly devastating news. Across the terminal, other Summit executives who happened to be at the airport that day were receiving similar calls. The panic spread visibly among staff as word traveled through hushed whispers and wide-eyed glances. Then, a new commotion at the terminal entrance drew attention. A group of men and women in immaculate suits marched purposefully through the doors, led by a young woman in her 30s with the confident stride of someone who navigated corporate battlefields daily. Vanessa Rivera, Maya's executive assistant, had arrived with reinforcements. Behind her walked 4 members of Pinnacle Technologies' legal team, each carrying leather portfolios and wearing expressions that would make any corporate executive reconsider their life choices. Vanessa spotted Maya immediately and moved directly toward her, the legal team following in perfect formation. "The documents you requested," Vanessa said, handing Maya a slim leather portfolio. "And the board members have been notified. They're assembling via video conference in 30 minutes. Maya nodded, taking the portfolio and opening it to review its contents. Inside were printouts of Summit Airlines' own non-discrimination policies. With her team now beside her, Maya straightened her jacket and began walking, not toward the exit as Alexander had demanded, but back toward Gate 42C where her confrontation had begun. Officer Moore made no move to stop her. The security guards looked to each other uncertainly, receiving no clear instructions through their radios, as the chain of command at Summit was now in disarray. Maya walked with purpose, her legal team flanking her like an honor guard. Passengers moved aside, some recording with their phones, others watching with a fascinated expression of people witnessing history without fully understanding it yet. As she approached the gate area, the airport's PA system crackled to life. "Attention all passengers. Due to an administrative action, all Summit Airlines flights are temporarily grounded. Summit Airlines passengers should stand by for further information. We apologize for any inconvenience." The announcement repeated in Spanish, then Mandarin, then French. Throughout the terminal, Summit Airlines passengers looked up in confusion and growing anger. Gate agents were suddenly bombarded with questions they couldn't answer. The airline's operations had effectively frozen in place. Alexander Hamilton, still on his phone at the far end of the terminal, looked up at the announcement with an expression of pure horror. In that moment, he finally connected the dots between the woman his staff had discriminated against and the financial catastrophe now unfolding around him. Maya hadn't just been denied boarding or a seat in first class. She had been denied her dignity. And now, Summit Airlines was about to learn exactly how costly that mistake would be. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change the airline industry forever. Alexander Hamilton versus Maya Johnson, old prejudices versus new power, discrimination versus justice. And it was about to play out in front of hundreds of witnesses, thousands of social media viewers, and millions of stockholders. Gate 42C had transformed from an ordinary airport gate into ground zero of what would soon be called the Summit Reckoning. The announcement that all flights were grounded had created instant chaos. Hundreds of passengers crowded the customer service desks, demanding explanations, refunds, and alternative travel arrangements. "What do you mean all flights are grounded? I have a connecting flight to catch. This is outrageous. I paid thousands for my ticket. Someone better explain what's happening right now." The Summit Airlines staff, completely unprepared for this situation, did what frightened people often do when facing an angry mob. They looked for a scapegoat. And they found one in Maya Johnson. "Ma'am, if you hadn't disrupted our boarding procedures, none of this would be happening," Rebecca, the gate agent who had first questioned Maya's ticket, announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Thomas Wilson, the supervisor, joined in. "This woman has caused a major disruption to our operations because she couldn't follow simple instructions." Their strategy worked, at least initially. Several passengers turned toward Maya with renewed anger, now blaming her for their travel woes. "Is she the reason our flights are canceled?" one man demanded. "Why is one person allowed to ruin travel plans for hundreds of people?" Another shouted. The crowd was growing hostile, closing in around Maya and her legal team. Officer Moore positioned himself closer to her, sensing the escalating tension. What happened next would become one of the most viewed viral videos of the year. With calm determination, Maya stepped away from her legal team, moved to a nearby row of seats, and gracefully stepped onto a chair to elevate herself above the crowd. "My name is Maya Johnson," she began, her voice carrying across the gate area with the same commanding presence that had captivated audiences in boardrooms and conference halls worldwide. "I am the CEO of Pinnacle Technologies and the founder of Horizon Capital." The simple act of claiming her identity and position, of refusing to be diminished or erased, immediately changed the energy in the terminal. Some passengers pulled out phones to search her name, eyes widening as they realized who was speaking. "I came to this airport today as a paying customer with a valid first-class ticket, just like many of you. I was denied boarding not because of anything I did wrong, but because of what I look like." A hush fell over the immediate area as passengers stopped to listen. Even those who had been hostile moments before seemed compelled by her dignified presence. "What happened to me today is not unique. It happens to people who look like me every day in airports across this country. The difference is that today, it happened to someone with the power to demand accountability." At that precise moment, Alexander Hamilton arrived at the gate, breathing heavily from having rushed across the terminal. He froze at the sight of Maya, standing elevated above the crowd, commanding the attention of everyone present. Attention that, as CEO, he believed should be his alone. A Summit executive leaned in and whispered urgently in his ear. Alexander's expression shifted from anger to shock to something resembling fear as he finally understood exactly who Maya Johnson was and what power she wielded over his company. The situation escalated further as the first media crews arrived, local news stations that had been tipped off about a developing story at LaGuardia. Cameras and microphones appeared, reporters pushing through the crowd to get closer to the action. Alexander immediately moved to intercept them. "This is a private matter concerning Summit Airlines. No media is permitted in this area." But Officer Moore stepped forward. "This is a public terminal, sir. The media has every right to be here as long as they don't interfere with security operations." The cameras turned instantly toward the confrontation between Alexander and the officer, capturing the Summit Airlines CEO's growing frustration and panic. Maya continued speaking, now aware that her words were being broadcast beyond just the terminal. "Today, Summit Airlines showed its true colors, not just to me, but to all of you, and now to the world. What you may not know is that through my investment firm, Horizon Capital, I control 28% of Summit Airlines stock, making me the largest shareholder in the company. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Several passengers who had been hostile now looked decidedly uncomfortable. Alexander Hamilton pushed through the crowd, desperate to take control of the situation. He reached the area where Maya stood, his face a mask of forced cordiality. "Miss Johnson," he began, loud enough for the cameras to catch. "There's clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. On behalf of Summit Airlines, I want to personally apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced today." Maya looked down at him with the calm gaze of someone who had dealt with men like Alexander her entire career, men who believed a simple apology could erase deeply ingrained patterns of discrimination. "This isn't about inconvenience, Mr. Hamilton. This is about systemic discrimination embedded in your corporate culture. Discrimination that you have personally fostered and encouraged." Alexander's artificial smile faltered. "I assure you, Summit has strict non-discrimination policies that exist on paper but not in practice," Maya interrupted. She turned to Vanessa, who handed her a tablet. "For the past 6 months, my team has been documenting discriminatory incidents on Summit Airlines flights and at Summit facilities." This was the bombshell revelation no one had anticipated. On the tablet, Maya pulled up a report with dates, times, and details of dozens of incidents, complete with photographic evidence and testimony. "We sent mystery shoppers on your airlines, people of different races, religions, and backgrounds, all traveling with identical tickets and itineraries. The disparities in how they were treated are not just disturbing, they're legally actionable." Alexander's face had gone from red to pale as the implications sank in. Camera crews pushed closer, capturing every moment of his visible distress. "Miss Johnson," he tried again, lowering his voice. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately. I'd be happy to offer you our corporate jet to Singapore, and we can discuss compensation for today's unfortunate events." Maya's response was measured but firm. "Today wasn't unfortunate, Mr. Hamilton. It was inevitable. When you build a corporate culture on exclusion rather than inclusion, when you dismiss diversity initiatives as PR stunts, when you tell your colleagues that some people don't know their place, this is the result." Alexander's eyes widened at hearing his own words quoted back to him. "You couldn't possibly have heard." "I heard everything," Maya stated simply. "And more importantly, I've been listening to your passengers, your employees, and the communities you claim to serve." As if on cue, a middle-aged black woman stepped forward from the crowd. "I've been flying Summit for 15 years as a business traveler," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've been randomly selected for additional screening every single time, every time." An elderly Asian man joined her. "They made me change seats last month because a white passenger didn't want to sit next to me. The flight attendant said it was to make everyone comfortable." One by one, passengers began sharing their own experiences of discrimination on Summit Airlines flights. Each story built upon the last, creating a damning portrait of a company culture rooted in bias and exclusion. Meanwhile, the passengers who had earlier hurled racist comments began to quietly edge away from the scene, clearly hoping to escape before being identified. But in our age of smartphones and social media, nothing remains hidden for long. Several onlookers had recorded their earlier comments, and these videos were already circulating on Twitter and Instagram, complete with hashtags identifying them. Maya let each person speak, giving weight and validation to experiences that had too often been dismissed or denied. When they finished, she addressed not just the crowd at Gate 42C, but the growing audience watching live streams across the world. "Discrimination isn't just morally wrong. It's bad business," she said. Summit Airlines has been losing market share for 8 consecutive quarters because it refuses to acknowledge that the world has changed. Today's consumers expect better. They demand better, and they deserve better. She turned directly to Alexander. "I came here today not just as a passenger, but as someone evaluating your airline for a potential $3 billion corporate contract for international business travel. I was also considering a full acquisition of Summit to expand Pinnacle Technologies' transportation division." Alexander Hamilton looked as though he might collapse on the spot. The potential deals she mentioned represented the lifeline his struggling airline desperately needed, a lifeline he had just watched slip away due to his own company's discriminatory practices. But based on what I've experienced and documented, Maya continued, I cannot in good conscience recommend Summit to my partners or consider it for acquisition, not without fundamental changes to its leadership and culture. By now, the confrontation had become the top trending topic on social media. Summit Reckoning and Maya Johnson were trending worldwide. The live streams had hundreds of thousands of concurrent viewers, all watching as decades of discriminatory airline practices were being exposed in real time. The situation escalated further when 3 members of Summit Airlines' board of directors arrived at the terminal, having been alerted to the crisis. They approached with visible alarm, clearly recognizing the catastrophic damage being done to the company's reputation and stock value with each passing minute. Miss Johnson, the lead director said, "We understand your concerns and take them extremely seriously. We would like to convene an emergency board meeting immediately to address these issues." Maya nodded. "That's exactly what I called for an hour ago." The group moved toward a private airport lounge that had been hastily secured for the impromptu board meeting. As Alexander Hamilton followed, visibly shaken, cameras tracked his every move. The difference between his confident swagger earlier and his current defeated posture told the entire story without a single word. Inside the airport's premium lounge, now cleared of other passengers, Summit Airlines board members assembled physically and virtually. Large screens showed the faces of directors who couldn't be present in person, but had joined via video conference. Every one of them wore expressions of grave concern. Maya and her legal team laid out their evidence methodically and devastatingly. The documentation was incontrovertible. Emails from Alexander dismissing diversity concerns, statistics showing patterns of discriminatory treatment, testimony from former employees about explicit directives to treat certain passengers differently than others. As the presentation continued, Alexander's breathing became labored. He loosened his tie, his face flushing an alarming shade of red. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the lounge's cool temperature. Halfway through the presentation of evidence, as Maya was explaining how discrimination had cost Summit 3 major corporate accounts in the previous year, Alexander suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed into his chair. I can't, he gasped before slumping sideways. The room erupted in panic. "Is there a doctor?" someone called out. Without hesitation, Maya took charge. "Call an ambulance immediately," she directed one of the board members. Then she loosened Alexander's tie completely and helped move him into a recovery position on the floor. It was a striking image. The woman who had every reason to despise this man was now the one ensuring he received proper care in his moment of crisis. Even as Alexander Hamilton faced the consequences of his actions, Maya Johnson demonstrated the compassion and humanity he had denied to so many others. The paramedics arrived within minutes, quickly determining that Alexander was experiencing symptoms consistent with a severe panic attack, coupled with extreme stress reaction, not a heart attack as initially feared. As they prepared to transport him to the hospital, he looked up at Maya with what appeared to be genuine shock at her intervention on his behalf. With Alexander on his way to the hospital, the board meeting reconvened. The directors, now fully aware of the magnitude of the crisis facing their company, moved quickly to damage control. After less than 30 minutes of deliberation, the board chairman announced their decision. Alexander Hamilton would be suspended immediately, pending a full investigation. An interim CEO would be appointed from outside the current executive team to ensure impartiality. The board unanimously approved the formation of an independent committee to investigate discriminatory practices throughout the organization and recommend comprehensive reforms. They requested that Maya's team share their full documentation with this committee. As the meeting concluded, the board chairman addressed Maya directly. "Miss Johnson, we cannot undo what happened to you today or to countless others over the years, but we can commit to ensuring it never happens again. We would welcome your guidance in this process of transformation." Maya's response was measured but firm. Real change requires more than apologies and committees. It requires a fundamental shift in culture, from the top down. I'll be watching closely to see if Summit is truly committed to that shift. As Maya exited the lounge with her team, she found the terminal had transformed. The anger that had greeted her earlier had been replaced with something altogether different. Respect, admiration, and in many cases, gratitude. Passengers approached to shake her hand. Airport staff who had been reluctant to get involved earlier now nodded in acknowledgement as she passed. And the media, sensing that they were documenting a pivotal moment in corporate America, captured every moment. The confrontation at Gate 42C proved to be just the beginning of a transformation that would ripple through not just Summit Airlines but the entire industry. But the most surprising developments were still to come. 1 week after the confrontation at LaGuardia, the world witnessed something unprecedented in aviation history. The Grand Ballroom at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan was filled to capacity with journalists from around the globe. The Summit Airlines logo, once a symbol of prestige, now hung behind the podium like a relic of a bygone era. The interim board chair, Dr. Elena Torres, notably the first Latina to hold such a position in a major airline, approached the microphone. The room fell silent. After careful consideration and preliminary findings from our internal audit, the board of directors has made the difficult but necessary decision to suspend all Summit Airlines operations effective immediately. The announcement sent shockwaves through the industry. Never before had an airline of Summit's size voluntarily grounded its entire fleet outside of a national emergency. Over 250 aircraft would sit idle at airports across the globe. More than 21,000 employees would be placed on paid leave during what was described as a comprehensive restructuring. The financial cost was staggering, estimated at over $35 million per day. But as Dr. Torres made clear in her introduction, the cost of continuing business as usual would have been far greater. Some have asked why such a drastic measure is necessary, Torres began, her voice steady and resolute. My answer is simple. Sometimes you need to tear down the foundation to rebuild properly. Summit's issues aren't superficial problems that can be fixed with sensitivity training or policy memos. The discrimination was structural, embedded in the company's culture from its highest levels to its daily operations. The cameras panned across the room, capturing the solemn faces of board members who had come to recognize the full extent of their company's failings. Many had initially resisted the idea of a complete shutdown, arguing for less dramatic remedies. But the preliminary audit findings had silenced those objections. Throughout the week following the LaGuardia incident, Summit Airlines terminals across the world had transformed into ghost towns. Ticketing counters stood empty. Check-in kiosks displayed temporarily unavailable messages. Maintenance hangars were quiet except for the minimal staff performing essential aircraft preservation work. At JFK Airport, a time-lapse camera captured the Summit Airlines fleet being towed to remote stands, their engines covered, their livery suddenly looking like artifacts from a company that already belonged to history. The airline industry, accustomed to continuous operation, regardless of circumstances, watched in disbelief as one of its oldest members voluntarily removed itself from the skies. Summit Airlines will remain closed, Dr. Torres continued at the press conference, until we have implemented new leadership, new policies, and new cultural safeguards that ensure every passenger and employee is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race, gender, religion, or background. What few people expected was the profound remorse expressed by some of the very employees who had been part of the discriminatory culture. In an emotional interview with CNN, Rebecca Thompson, the gate agent who had first denied Maya boarding, spoke through tears about her own complicity. I've spent 10 years working for Summit, and I never once questioned the patterns I was participating in, she admitted. We were trained to provide extra scrutiny to certain passengers, but it was never explicitly called racial profiling. It was coded in language about security concerns or passenger comfort. Rebecca had since volunteered to join an employee committee working with the independent auditors to identify and address discriminatory practices. I can't change what I did, she said, but I can help make sure it never happens again. Meanwhile, at New York Presbyterian Hospital, Alexander Hamilton was recovering from what doctors had diagnosed as a stress-induced cardiovascular episode. Television footage showed him watching the press conference announcing the airline suspension, his expression transforming from disbelief to something resembling understanding as the full consequences of his leadership became clear. According to sources close to him, Alexander had been uncharacteristically quiet during his recovery, declining to issue statements or mount a defense of his actions. One hospital staff member reported overhearing him say, "She was right," though whether he meant Maya or someone else wasn't clear. 2 weeks into the shutdown, the independent auditors released their preliminary findings, and they were even more damning than anticipated. The impact extended far beyond Summit Airlines. Within days of the audit's release, competing airlines began announcing their own diversity initiatives, clearly fearing similar scrutiny. United Airlines launched a comprehensive review of its customer service practices. Delta established an independent oversight committee for discrimination complaints. American Airlines announced mandatory anti-bias training for all staff. What we're seeing, noted aviation industry analyst Karen Chen, is an unprecedented moment of self-examination across the entire airline industry. The Summit incident has forced every carrier to confront practices they've ignored or denied for decades. 3 months after the LaGuardia confrontation, the transformation of the aviation landscape was evident. The Department of Transportation announced new regulations requiring airlines to track and report data on passenger treatment by race and other demographic factors. Industry associations established certification programs for equity in customer service. Insurance companies began offering lower rates to airlines with robust anti-discrimination programs. At LaGuardia Airport, Gate 42C, where everything had begun, was being renovated. The Summit Airlines signage had been removed, but a new sign covered in blue construction wrap bore the teaser, "Coming soon, a new way to fly." Behind the barricades, workers were installing a completely redesigned gate area featuring accessibility enhancements, prayer rooms, multilingual signage, and culturally inclusive artwork. 6 months after operations were suspended, Summit Airlines returned to the skies with new leadership, new policies, and a new commitment to inclusion. Their first flight, symbolically from New York to Singapore, was piloted by Captain Amara Rodriguez, the airline's first black female chief pilot. Serving as lead flight attendant was Michael Chen, who had previously filed a discrimination suit against the airline but had returned under the new management. And while Alexander Hamilton never returned to the aviation industry, sources reported that he had begun volunteering with community organizations focused on economic opportunities for minority youth, a surprising epilogue to a career defined by exclusion rather than inclusion. The airline industry would never be the same, and it all began because one woman refused to accept being denied her rightful place. If this story moved you, please like and hit that subscribe button right now. Share it with others, so they too can learn that standing up against discrimination isn't just about personal dignity. It's about creating lasting change for everyone. What moments in your life have you witnessed or experienced discrimination? How did you respond? Share your stories in the comments below. Together, we can continue the conversation about how individual actions can transform entire industries when we refuse to accept injustice as the status quo. Remember, sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one with the title. It's the one with the courage to stand up for what's right, even when standing alone.